You are listening to Torah Treasures, a messianic perspective on the weekly Torah portion, featuring Rabbi Jason Sobel.
This week's Torah portion is Parashat Noach. It tells the story of Noah and the flood. In the Torah, we actually find two accounts of humanity's rebelliousness against God and his subsequent response. In the first account, God brings the Mabul, the flood, which destroys all of mankind. In the second, God confuses humankind's language and scatters them across the face of the earth. Why did God destroy the generation of Noah and not the generation of Babel? What does this teach us about God and how he views sin and evil? The reason why God responds differently to the action of these two evil generations is based primarily upon the nature of their sins. The primary transgression of the generation of the flood, according to the Torah, was chamas, violence. As Genesis 6:11 states, the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Rashi, the famous medieval Jewish commentator, interprets the Hebrew term chamas as theft. This is supported by the Talmud, which teaches their destiny was not sealed except on the account of robbery, Sanhedrin 108a. This includes moving their neighbors' boundary stones, stealing each other's livestock, and robbing defenseless widows and orphans of their possessions. In fact, Midrash Tanchuma states that some of the people preferred to walk around naked out of fear that their clothes would be torn off their body. Other sins associated with this generation were bloodshed and sexual immorality, which included the sexual exploitation of women and minors. All of these evil deeds have one thing in common. They demonstrate a complete lack of love and compassion for other people. The sin of the generation of Babel is primarily rebellion against God and avodah zarah, idolatry. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we are scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Genesis 11:4. Commenting on this verse, Rabbi Elazar said, they split up into three parties: those who wanted to rebel against God and build a tower. One said, "Let us ascend and dwell there." The second said, "Let us ascend and serve idols." And the third said, "Let us ascend and wage war with God." All of these sinful attitudes and actions have one thing in common. They are sins that are directed toward God. In the Torah, these two rebellions become archetypes of the two major categories of sin: those against fellow human beings and those against God. This distinction corresponds to the two tablets that Moses received from God at Sinai. On the first tablet was written the mitzvot bein adam lemakom, the commandments between God and people. On the second tablet were the mitzvot bein adam lechavero, the commandments between a person and his fellow. Often people think that God takes the mitzvot, the commandments on the first tablet, much more seriously and imposes a harsher judgment on those who violate the commandments between God and man. But is this position justified based upon this week's Torah portion? The answer is no. Rashi himself supports this answer in his comments on Genesis 11:9. Now, which sin is more severe? That of the generation of the flood or that of the generation of the disunion of Babel? The generation of the flood were robbers, and there was hostility between them. That is why they were obliterated. The generation of the disunion of Babel would behave with love and friendship among themselves, as it says, one language and unified of words. Thus you have learned that conflict is hateful and peace is great. Rashi, drawing on Midrash Rabbah, underscores the fact that the sin of the generation of the flood was much greater. The reason God treats sins against humans much more seriously than sins against God is that they pose a real danger. For a person has the power to cause a considerable harm to someone physically, spiritually and emotionally. Therefore, God must deal harshly with these individuals and by so doing make an example of them to future generations. Threats against God are laughable, since no one can actually cause the Holy One harm. Thus, God destroyed one generation and only scatters another by confusing their language. This lesson is consistent with the teaching of Yeshua Rabbeinu, Jesus our Rabbi, who calls us to demonstrate our love for God by displaying radical love for our neighbor. He said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself.